So I wanted to start out this morning with a shout out to moms. I just think moms are great. and our also nice second daughter, Kaide, had her first child on Friday night. So Friday very late. Well, it's actually Saturday morning, I guess we could say. So her name is May. And we're able to see her yesterday, and it's so wonderful, to hold a fresh baby. Such a thing, a fresh baby. But I must say also, and particularly as a father, to see your daughter turn into a mother is really quite a thing. And well, I won't say any more than that. But thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to start this morning talking from the Diamond Sutra. And my plan is throughout the fall to be referring back to the Diamond Sutra in talks that I give on Sundays. I don't always give a talk on Sundays, but through the fall, that's my plan to continue to speak from the Diamond Sutra. I wanted to start out today talking a little bit about studying in the Buddhist tradition. We get trained to study in a particular way with our schooling, and there's a lot that's good about that. And even within our schooling, there are different approaches to meaning making or knowledge that happen depending on what discipline you're in. Your literature teacher had a really different approach to that than, say, your physical science teachers had to that. Sometimes they intersected, but too often I think the imbalance is towards a kind of extractive understanding. And so we think that there's something to be understood, and then we encounter that thing to be understood, and then we go through a process of trying to extract the meaning, or what's it really saying, or what truth could be established from this particular course of inquiry, as if the truth existed in some kind of independently existing way. So we have a kind of bias in how it is that we're encountering things in that direction. Again, that direction has lots of strengths, but also has some weaknesses. And a lot of those weaknesses are spiritual weaknesses. And so when we're encountering a spiritual teaching, a spiritual text, to take a little time to reflect on and to feel for the ways that our mind of acquisition and consumption gets activated so quickly, and to key into that a little bit and see how I just want to gobble the thing up and digest it. And actually you can gobble it up, and you gobble it up again and again and again, and the digesting happens again and again and again and again. That's the main thing, is there's not a stopping point. These kinds of teachings are more like invitations to walk through a gateway into another way of being in the world, another way of seeing, another way of experiencing, etc. So if I was to condense all of that, I would say studying is receiving. Just keep that in your mind. Studying is receiving. To be able to study the sutras is an act of receptivity as opposed to an act of conquering or acquisition or extraction or any of those things. And one of the things that comes from that is that we won't understand a lot of what we receive. In your life, you're receiving teachings, situations all the time, most of which we don't understand. And the not understanding is the basis for coming to some understanding. If you set aside the not understanding, you never have understanding. The two are really in cooperation with each other. Because if you never encounter the not understanding, you're not reforming anything. You're just taking whatever shape you've got and you're kind of pushing it on to the teaching or whatever situation you're on. You're like, oh, I know this. I love it. Our 4-year-old grandson, he's in that time of his life where he loves to explain everything. I don't know that all little boys do this, but I certainly did that. He certainly does it. I know some little girls do it too, but it's this particular quality of just wanting to identify the world, through explanation. And he just explained everything. And to some degree, all of our minds are working that way all the time. We're just in this kind of explanation. But if we think about study as receptivity, now we've shifted that a bit. We're saying, okay, I've received this thing. I'm going to trust that it's important. And maybe it will become significant to me. Maybe it will open a door for me, or maybe it won't. But I'm going to not just chuck it or try to break it open. I'm going to let it be there as a kind of jewel, as a kind of diamond in this case. So, this text like the Diamond Sutra appears in our life. So for all of you who are hearing this now, it has appeared in your life. Maybe it appeared in your life a long time ago, or maybe not so long ago, or maybe just right now. But when a text or teaching like this appears, really, your fate is sealed. And from a very long perspective, a very long Buddhist perspective, would say that there's something has happened now, that there's actually a karma or a great good fortune that you're in this situation to meet this text or to hear of this teaching. And that comes from somewhere and it leads somewhere. And in a classical Buddhist sense, we would say it comes from your mind of awakening and it leads to your Buddhahood. So you can think about that in time. In the Buddhism, we think about having many, many, many lives. And we'd say at some life in the past, you turn towards awakening. And that is unfolding through your successive lifetimes. And because of that, this gateway of this sutra is opening up, which is leading in, for some of you, maybe not such a far future, but for most of us, a very, very far, unconceivable future in which our own Buddhahood will appear. Another way we could think about this is it's emerging from our mind of awakening is a kind of depth that we can't really understand. We can't go there with our conscious mind. In that case, this is what depth means. And that every single one of us is completely endowed with that mind of awakening. And it speaks to and through us as the experiences of our life. So when a text like the Diamond Sutra appears, it is that mind of awakening itself which is appearing or which is speaking to us. And that the Buddhahood of our own being, just as it is confirmed by that. This is a kind of classical type understanding of what's happening. I would say one of the things that's important about that is when we meet a text like the Diamond Sutra, we're really meeting our whole life. That receptivity that I was talking about is really not just a receptivity to what may be written in that particular text, but the text itself becomes like a gateway that is made up of all the things of your life. And the reason that's really important is because that's the terrain on which we study. We don't just study to understand something in an abstract sense or a disconnected sense. We study it because it invites us into our own life in a new way. Or, as I'll talk about in a little bit, it births us. One of the meanings of Prajnaparamita is the mother of the Buddhas, the womb of the Buddhas. There are contractions involved. And they're all real. And there are opportunities and oftentimes challenges. So this kind of balance of outward and inward in study is really important. So whether you take up this sutra, I'll give you some places where you can find copies of it. If you take it up, like a regular reading of it, or really I encourage you. I was speaking with someone yesterday who has been in intensive training for periods of their life and is trying to establish relationship. And I said, just get a copy and put it by your bed. I'm not even telling you to read it. Just put it there. Put it someplace that's very difficult to avoid, right? And what I mean by avoid is that you have to see it. There's also, by the way, a good recommendation for what to do with your meditation cushion. Put it between you and your computer, your phone, the bathroom, whatever it is. So whether you sit down or not, that's another question. But you can't just hide from it. Right? But pretty soon you will filter it out from your mind quickly. But just put it someplace close. And then when you're bored, or you just have a little moment opens up, or you feel a little inspiration, open it up. Not with a consuming mind, but just with this idea that, okay, there's something here that's important. And how do I know it's important? Because it's appeared, which is really true of everything. Right? So that in itself is giving you a kind of clue into what the discipline of the study is like. It's different than much of the discipline we have, especially if we're very studious people. Now that kind of study is also great, and if you like that, I would encourage you. There's lots and lots. I mean, there's commentaries from here to Ohio on the Diamond Sutra. Diamond Sutra is one of the central sutras of the Mahayana tradition, and particularly the Zen tradition. It became the cornerstone of the Zen tradition at the time of the sixth ancestor, or by the time of the sixth ancestor, for those of you who know the history a little bit. Originally it was Lankavatara Sutra with the Bodhidharma, and then in those first few generations that had almost entirely shifted over to the Diamond Sutra. Another fun fact about the Diamond Sutra is it's the book that we have, a material book that we have that was printed the earliest in human civilization. So this was in the 800s, and woodblock printing in China. For sure there were books that were printed earlier than that, but we actually have a copy of the Diamond Sutra from that period, and you can go, and I forget which museum it's at now, but if you just look up Diamond Sutra, it's one of the first things that will come up on the Demon Box, and you can look at the photos, like high-res photos from the museum where that is kept. It's really beautiful. And when I was looking at it this morning, I realized it's our daughter Satsuki's birthday. May 11th was the date for the printing. So that was kind of nice. So another way we could think about this, how are we going to regard this kind of teaching, is that the teaching is not the text, but it also is the text. So, this is my little copy of the Diamond Sutra, which I'll tell you about here in a moment, which I carry with me most places I go. I have a Chinese version too. Yeah, Chinese version here too. But this, of course, is the Diamond Sutra. And, you can see there's all these words inside of it. But you could think about the words inside of it are sort of like a gateway. They're like a structure which is inviting something. There's all the space which the words are not, is also the Diamond Sutra. Or if your brain works this way my brain works a little bit, the whole universe is inverted around the shape of these characters. Mm-hmm. So the whole universe is imprinted with these characters. Because these characters exist, everything else in the universe relates to them as their shape. If that doesn't make any sense to you, forget about it. There's just a few people whose brains work like that. Mine's one of them. and that's exciting to me, to think about the presence of these words being about everything, not just about some kind of extractive possibility of what they might contain. We would say that they're really a living body of awakening. Whatever teaching is here is alive. Now that's tricky for us because when you print it in a book, you're like, it doesn't really move. Or at least you've convinced yourself of that. You've convinced yourself that the text just stays in the same place all the time. Now I'm not going to make a comment on the scientific verifiability of the text moving or not, but I would tell you if you spend time with these texts, they move. They definitely move. And things that you didn't know were there then will be there. And you could swear it wasn't there. And you go back and you find it. And that's the kind of way that we want to regard them. Not as a thing, but as a way. An unconstructed, unfabricated way that is just having the compassion to meet us where where we are. That doesn't mean that the text will never be challenging, or we'll disagree with it, or it'll tick us off. Those things all happen. Now, the sutra itself I mentioned is one of the core Mahayana sutras. It is part of a compendium of sutras known as the Prajnaparamita Sutras, or the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are various length. Their content is similar, or we could say that they're all endeavoring to bring forth the body of awakening in a linguistic way. That body, that alive body of awakening, is showing up as these many, many texts. The shortest one is one syllable. It's called the Prajnaparamita in one syllable. And all the way up to the Prajnaparamita in 100,000 lines. With those of you who have been here for some special celebrations, particularly the New Year's, and there's some people fanning these books with little teeny tiny print. That's the full 100,000 line version of the Prajnaparamita sutras. So in between there's all different kinds of sizes. One of the oldest is known as the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines. And that's a beautiful work that's studied in the West quite a bit. In Japan, it's not studied quite as much. In Tibet, they study it quite a bit. In Japan, there's a little bit more favoritism towards the shorter ones, and then the Prajnaparamita in 20,000 lines, which is one of the longer ones as well. So anyway, there's all different sizes. What we chant on Sunday morning, the Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra, the Heart Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra, that great perfect wisdom, that's Prajnaparamita. So the Prajnaparamita Sutra of the heart is the one that we chant. That's a very short and very magical. So that's one that's chanted very often, and it's kind of, the sutra is folded in on itself. So if you read that, when you're chanting, if you ever think about what it might mean, it's pretty confusing. That's if you just think about these 100,000 lines all folded up until they get into that little package. That's why it's hard to understand it. The Diamond Sutra is known as the Prajnaparamita in 300 lines. It's 32 short chapters. Some are just like a short paragraph, some are a few paragraphs. But those 32, you could read it in a half hour, 40 minutes, something like that in English. A little quicker if you read Chinese. But it's not so long. But it is very interesting in that in almost all of the Prajnaparamita sutras, Subhuti, who is one of the foremost of the Buddha's disciples, he speaks as a representative of the Buddha. In almost all the Prajnaparamita texts, Subhuti, when he speaks, you can just think it's the Buddha speaking. And usually the situation is the Buddha's entered into a total and complete concentration, and they're just sitting there, and then their disciple speaks in their stead. In the Diamond Sutra, Subhuti and the Buddha have a conversation. So some people think about the Diamond Sutra as being really one of the origin texts of the Prajnaparamita, because it's the place where Subhuti gets it together. It's where Subhuti is asking the question. It's where Subhuti becomes Subhuti. He becomes the representative of the Prajnaparamita through this conversation that he has with the Buddha. Now the title, the Diamond Sutra, there's many ways to approach it, and some people kind of have like a opposition to certain interpretations, and other people think it should be this way or it should be that way. So the Vajrachadika Prajnaparamita Sutra is how it's written in Sanskrit, and then in the Chinese, they chose to translate the Vajra as the characters for diamond, and oftentimes they drop the latter part of the Sanskrit, which means cutting through, and they just call it the Diamond Sutra. So a fuller interpretation would be the diamond that cuts through delusion sutra. probably would be quite more original. But because in the Chinese it's usually shortened just to these 3 characters, this says Diamond Sutra. And in English also we tend to just say Diamond Sutra. So some teachers, like the Venerable Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, which many people are familiar with in the West, he makes a strong case for always calling it the diamond that cuts through delusion, not the diamond. I really appreciate that, because it's so easy to think of a diamond as a thing. So the Diamond Sutra, everything kind of can kind of become inert. We should think about the diamond as being this thing which can cut through everything. I mean, if you get a glass cutter, that's what's on there, right? Or you get your diamond saw blade to cut stone or whatever. The diamond is this thing which can cut through all of the rigidity or all of the hard surfaces. And it cuts through anything. But this other way of interpreting it that came out by an emphasis on just calling it the Diamond Sutra is emphasizing its indestructibility. The first way emphasizes its ability to cut through, and the second emphasizes the sutra's indestructibility, or the indestructibility of the body of awakening, or the total aliveness of being. And so I actually prefer to embrace the ambiguity and to see both of those sides as having an important face to show. In the case of what cuts through anything, is the diamond has to be so sharp that its edge doesn't even really exist. That's what it means to be sharp. Right? Is that like if you sharpen a knife, if you're going to get that knife, like the people who are knife geeks, they have those little things to measure. Doesn't it have one of those little thing to measure that? I'm usually just sort of scrape it on my nail, or cut a carrot with it or something to see how sharp it is. So I'm sharpening kitchen knives, but you can what is it 0.000 millimeters or whatever like that. This is how sharp they've gotten their knife. But that's the quality of the diamond that can cut through. Is not that it exists as this force which can pummel your life into shape, but that it is the nothingness. It is the point that only regresses until it enters right down into the depths of your heart and can touch those deepest places of your being. So that's one way we can understand all of the coverings that we have, all of the delusion that we're mired in consistently, that this has the ability to be able to say, wake up. And it's just going to cut into these places. And we hear that right away. The Buddha doesn't spare anything. He's not mean, but he's just like, look, this is what you got to do. And the thing that he asked you to do is impossible. But that's really what's inspiring. Doing something possible is not so inspiring. So, but the other side, the indestructibility, or that there's no way to shatter this living body of the Buddha. It is totally inclusive. If the knife or the sword is what kind of shows up as the sign of sharpness or the symbol of sharpness, in this case the symbol that shows up is the mirror. A mirror, if you can imagine a mirror with no edge. It's kind of trippy if you hang out there for a little while. Okay? That there's just there's no place you could say, okay, this is the end of the mirror. It means everything that you could, if we're just in the visual world, you'd say everything you see is a reflection of everything else, because there's nothing which is not the mirror, and nothing which is not also then a reflection in the mirror as well. So oftentimes we have this symbol of a round mirror, like we have on the altar there in front of the Buddha, which is not just to remind you that you're also a Buddha, which it also is there for that. If you're prostrating to the Buddha, you're also prostrating to the Buddha of yourself. But it's also a symbol of that round mirror in which this alive body is not located somewhere. It is the totality of being, which is very enlivening. And that's what our practice, that's what meditation and everything is pointing us towards. So the no inside or no outside of the total sharpness or the total inclusivity, this is what is known as prajna, or wisdom. Sometimes I like to say living wisdom, because wisdom has such a sort of old leather-bound pipe in a seat, not moving sort of feel to it, which can also be living wisdom, right? But it has, we're sort of like, this is going to be enthroned somewhere. And the living wisdom is saying, no, it's alive. Right? You're meeting this continual birthing of the Buddha's mind. And that prajna is what allows us to cross over. And that's what paramita means, Prajnaparamita. The paramita means to cross over, or to go beyond. To go beyond the kind of limiting confines of suffering and the ways that we limit the aliveness of being. So I'm going to give you just a little taste of the beginning of the sutra, and then we'll have some times for questions. So in the beginning of this sutra, before that, I forgot to tell you about some sutras that places that you might look for one if you like the study the Diamond Sutra. There's 3 that we put on the announcement for these talks, and that's always on the website so you can see it. The first one, I believe that's listed, is a translation by a scholar named Red Pine, who's done a number of translations of Buddhist and Taoist texts and poetry. And that's a very thick book that includes a translation of the Diamond Sutra, primarily from the Sanskrit, with a lot of commentary, which has primarily been translated from Chinese teachers. So it's a very interesting kind of combination of those two things. The second is the Diamond that Cuts Through Delusion, which is Thich Nhat Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh's commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. And it's a very thin book. It's been out for a very long time, and it's been reissued. So those are easy to get copies of. And that one is translated from the Chinese, but is more interpretive. So there's a little more kind of flesh on the bone, so to speak, which is good if you're trying to bite into something. And so that one has a little more interpretation in the translation, and then a commentary that comes with it. I love that he starts that book by saying, do not hurry too much to read the commentaries. They will mess up your understanding. And I don't take that as a comment about the poor quality of the commentaries, but the poor quality of the way in which we will encounter the commentaries, which is usually, what the hell does this thing mean? Wouldn't you tell me? And then we go to the commentary for that, as opposed to the kind of receptivity that I was talking about earlier. So he's so poetic. He says, I encourage you to read this in the middle of the night. Yeah. So that's a Thich Nhat Hanh's version, and then the third one is this is a copy I'm holding here. I think they will print books for you. I think you can order from them. The Guang Shan International Translation Center. They make books that I think you can order from them. But I printed one out because I'm that kind of person, and sewed it together because that felt good, and so that translation is also a good one. This one is from the Chinese and is much slimmer. I've started working a little bit on a translation that I'd like us to make it with the temple. They'll be even more slim, but we'll see. That might take a little time to get there. So those are 3 that I recommend. Again, they're all a little bit different. There are many, so don't worry too much if it's not one of those 3. If you're going to get a copy and read it, but those are 3 that I can kind of attest for. Again, the Red Pine one is a lot more around it to kind of keep you engaged. Thich Nhat Hanh a little bit less, but the translation's more interpretive, and it's also from the Chinese. And then when you get to this one, Guang Shan International Translation Center, it's a lot more like that sword. It's just, and so you can play with what you like. So I'll be reading from that one just now. I'm just going to read the first chapter, which is very short. The Causes of this Dharma Meaning. That's the title. Thus have I heard, at one time, Buddha was in the city of Sravasti at Jeddah Grove Monastery with a gathering of monks numbering 1,250. At mealtime, the world-honored one donned his robe, held his bowl, and went into the city of Sravasti for alms. After he had gone from house to house, he returned to the grove. When he had finished eating, he put away his robe and bowl, washed his feet, straightened his mat, and sat down. There's not a few number of commentators who consider that to be the Diamond Sutra. The other 31 chapters is a commentary on that. You can see why that might be the case. If you hold that image, whether you're attracted to being a renunciate like the Buddha was or not, the kind of clarity with which his place, his doing appears in the first chapter, I think is inspiring. Is simply doing these things of life in a very straightforward way, with a community of others who are also taking care of life and awakening in that same very straightforward way. Now, one of the things about seeing a picture of a life like that, kind of idealized picture, wouldn't that be nice to have a nice garden in the middle of the city which you could come and sit in sometime? We're lucky. We have that. Maybe a little small for 1,250 monks, but possible to get a sense of what that's like. So if we see something that's inspiring like that, you come to temple, maybe you feel something kind of inspiring about the teachings or how the temple is or the life that's being presented through the temple in some way. Almost always the shadow of the ideal is that we start to think of it as a thing. We fixate on it, and the fixation on the image that we've created takes precedence. But the fact of the matter of a life that the Buddha's presenting here is that it can't be created. It can only be received. And that's how the Buddha lives. He takes up his bowl and he walks into the city. And that bowl is a symbol of a life that is fully founded on receptivity. The renunciates are not allowed to grow any of their own food, to make anything that would support themselves. In this traditional renunciate, that's how they live. I'm not a renunciate, I don't live that way. But that bowl is the gateway of life. Because actually all of us are receiving our life. We're not creating it. We're receiving it from everything that shows up here as me. And so the Buddha is showing this total stability of a life, of a heart, with that total open simplicity, something which cannot be grabbed. It can only be received, cared for, together with others. So that's the context in which the sutra emerges. And then Subhuti, who in other sutras usually is not, he's just like one of the people hanging out. It's not really called out so much until we get to the Prajnaparamita sutras. But this is interesting to note. Subhuti is known as being the foremost of those who dwell in peace. He's known for being kind and for being the deepest practitioner of loving kindness, which you're teaching on this fall. So that's very interesting for us to know as Subhuti emerges in the next chapter. The sword quality of the Diamond Sutra is definitely there. There's a fierceness. But the fierceness comes in this dialogue between the Buddha, the awakened one, and the representative of gentleness and kindness within the Sangha. What does that tell us? It tells us that there's no force that is going to break into this truth. Subhuti is not one for breaking things apart by force. He's actually interested in something much more powerful than that, which is that blade that comes in because all things are included. And so Subhuti comes forward to ask the question. And we'll talk about this next week, but essentially he says, how do we control our minds? How do we control this thing? And then that brings forth the Diamond Sutra. Anyone have any questions or additions? We have a little time.
Question that you can say no comment if you want. It seems to me easier in Buddhism to have that idea about being receptive to teachings and not thinking this thing is true and going out in the world telling other people that you should believe this is true. Yeah. I just wonder, how would one approach, say, Christianity or Judaism or traditions that have a canon that's all in one book? Like, how could you take that receptivity into those traditions?
Well, I think the same thing, really. So there's some traditions that are very concerned with what is orthodox in terms of what will we put our seal on as saying that this is the true teaching. I think there's some real reason for that, to create a kind of canon that can be worked within, and you see people going off in weird directions, and you're like, okay, maybe not St. Thomas anymore because it's not working out for us. But that's also the vehicle for all kinds of power things and things that we might miss out on. But I think if we approach those with that same kind of receptivity, then the inner work is happening. The issue is that when we're only trying to prove it outwardly, we might get someplace in terms of our theological, adventure, but we haven't really reconciled it with the human heart. And it seems to me that in the case of those religions that you mentioned, they're very concerned with the human heart. And so we need that kind of both direction. And argue. One thing I love about Judaism is to argue with God and the rabbis. And so, that's also good. Yeah.
You were talking earlier about the what we chant on Sundays, the heart of great perfect wisdom. From the very first time I heard it, and every single time we chant it, my mind always snags on the line, far beyond all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. And inverted views, what are those?
So here's a way you could think about it, is that we walk around all the time thinking that I'm a subject in a world of objects. It's totally inverted. You could create that understanding of being from the information given, but it's in Buddhism we call it diluted. It's inverted. The thing I like about the inversion is it's a little bit like, okay, you're looking at the black part or the white part to see the picture, and you're seeing one side of it, but you're not seeing the other side. It is true that you're there and I'm here, but we just grab onto that, and that's where the inversion comes. But the other side of it is that there's no me without you, and there's no you without me. Just in a very immediate sense, just being present together is how it is that your being and my being are emerging. So in this sense where we say far beyond inverted views, where those inverted views, the one-sided kind of grasping is given up, then the nirvana or some of the kind of images that are given don't resonate with as much as us today, but traditionally nirvana would be about the extinguishing of the flame, which sounds like a disappointment to us. But in this case, the flame is like the flame of craving, which continually brings about instability and suffering. So with the extinguishing of that flame, there is this emergence of a cosmos full of jewels. That's the kind of imagery. It's not just it goes out and then everything's gone. It's like it goes out and then the true face of being can can be encountered. So what is it, to recognize our own inverted ways is one of the reasons we have these kinds of wisdom teachings, is to try to teach us about how do we cut through that delusion or that inversion. But then it also takes a really healthy amount of just acceptance that we are deluded. And that doesn't have to be a big disappointment. It's actually the opportunity. That's the only way that the Dharma reaches anywhere, is for us being willing to be deluded. Because now the Dharma can help transform us. So we really have to be a little careful of being too hard on ourselves for being deluded. Yeah.
I am perpetually working with this edge that is so present in what you're speaking, and if you can illuminate it, help me unfold it more. This edge between the heart of trying to break open a text and understand it, stand on top of it, and get it, and explain it, and the heart of vigorously throwing oneself into a text. I lean towards, if I'm trying to avoid the former, I lean towards then lightly bathing in the text, and then I recognize how much I lose with that heart, because I'm not throwing my full attention into what is an inverted view, what is that, what is that. Can you help differentiate those two things?
So it comes back to the receptivity. So we can, while throwing ourselves in is good, and kind of getting our energy together and being like, okay, like if you're like, hey, it's fall, and I'm time to buckle down. Well, it is time to buckle down. It's like, if you're not going to buckle down now, when are you going to buckle down, right? There's that, and that, I think that's sort of an energy in fall for many people, and I think it's largely helpful. And we find, that the hall's more full in the fall. We find people ready, they're like, I feel ready to lean in. It's great. So we should have all of that. The mistake we make is that we think throwing ourselves in is what's going to do it. But actually throwing ourselves in means you also have to receive inwardly. It's not an outward movement, it's an inward movement. And that takes, oftentimes we think of that as being kind of a soft, always a sort of, I'm just going to receive, sort of, we get very kind of about it. But receptivity also takes a huge amount of courage. So for example, to say, oh, that's what this means. Not, that's what this means. Oh, that's what this means. Not that the meaning which has come to me is now exclusive of all other possible meanings, but it is actually my meaning, which is emerging in that moment. When you get a taste of that, you get sucked in, and it gets sucked into you. But it takes some energy, it takes some effort to make that happen. So if you take the kind of, that's sort of like, yeah, okay, I want to do this, don't realizing you need to receive and not just try to outwardly create meaning, but don't get too timid when you go the other direction. That's a big habit I think a lot of us have. Really be like, no, I think it means this. Argue with yourself or other people or other commentators, and have the kind of that kind of processing which is going into you more deeply. And then questions like, so I've been really struggling, I'll talk more about this week, I've been really struggling with this word subdue, which Subhuti asks the Buddha, he says, how should we subdue our minds or conquer our minds? And I'm like, come on, it just can't be that word, So I looked up the very, very old way of writing the character, thinking I might find some back door in which I could deconstruct the word subdue, and it would fit more comfortably into my idea about what I want to be doing in practice. It's not there. Like the farther back I went, the more it was like armies destroying other armies. Yeah, exactly. So I'm working with that, and there's and then the double thing that sucks about it is the Buddha says, I'll teach you how to subdue your mind. He doesn't like reframe it. He doesn't say, well, that's not quite the skillful way to think about it, Subhuti. You should think about it this way. So anyway, more to come on that. But I would give you that is a kind of example of a place where a word will become very important to you. And that's where this other kind of study is possible. I'm not going to find the original character character so that I can make some truth claim about what did Subhuti actually say. I don't care. But what I do care about is, what's this subduing business? And why do I have an aversion to it? And what is maybe good about my aversion to it, and maybe bad about my aversion to it, and why does it keep sticking with me? And what does it have to do with this sword? So those kind of questions then become really spiritual, personal spiritual questions. And that then has to do everything with when I'm sitting down. How am I sitting down for meditation, for example? How am I holding my new grandchild? Everything is about that. And so that's what we're looking for, the place in which there's enough meaning for me individually that it starts to appear in a lot of places in my life. Yeah. And then I would say this. I know I spent a lot of time saying, we learn these habits of study that are not so helpful. One of the habits we don't tend to learn these days is the habits of the desk. Having a place where you study and you sit down and you crack the thing open and you're like, whoa. That spot is really important because so much what we're like, I'm studying, I'm sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee reading the Diamond Sutra. Okay, great. But what's the quality of your mind in that situation? That could be a good place for it to enter, which is, being very relaxed, but also having a place where, come back. And maybe I copy it out. That's why we have those kinds of practices too. Copy the sutra. Dwell on some particular point. Look it up in a lot of different books. Anyway. Maybe we have time for one more if anyone.
Is there a particular reason right now that you've chosen for us to go into the text?
I want to. There's a kind of, for me, I think this is, for me personally, and then I found at the temple that it's a good balance thing that's happening. On the altar, on the Buddha's left is Prajnaparamita, the mother of the Buddhas, and all the Prajnaparamita texts come from her mind, and so that's one of the site of wisdom. And then on the Buddha's right here is Avalokitesvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion in this form, the Bodhisattva of compassion with 1,000 arms, and all of the great compassionate heart Dharani that we chant in the morning liturgy. It comes from a very, very ancient text about this Bodhisattva, and this is like the incantation of her heart. That's what the heart of great Thank you. Great compassionate heart Dharani. That's where that comes from, and so. Also, Avalokitesvara is a very big figure in the Lotus Sutra, which we spent a lot of time studying over the past year. So usually when we're kind of leaning Lotus for a while, then I start getting a little hankering to kind of come in this direction. And that seems to have been good for our community, that those two, the Lotus Sutra and Dharani's and the Prajnaparamita Sutras create this, in the oldest way we talk about it, the two wings of enlightenment. That you have to have wisdom and compassion. Wisdom without compassion doesn't work. Compassion without wisdom doesn't work. And I love that it's a bird, because like if it was a bicycle, it could be a unicycle or something, but a bird really, one wing just doesn't get you there, even for a moment. You have to have both wings completely engaged for flight to happen. So that kind of image that we really need both. So what's great about studying like Prajnaparamita Sutras, if you study them, the compassion just comes right there. It's not like you have to like dwell in it for a long time to find the compassion. It's just immediately there. And the other side is true. If you study the compassion teachings, then the wisdom is true. Okay, maybe we'll have some coffee.